Welcome to Studying Law Around the World. I'm Claudio Klaus. In each episode, I talk with lawyers, law students, and professors from different parts of the world to talk about legal education, careers, and what the profession looks like in real life. We talk about the hard parts, the surprises, and the decisions that shaped their paths. Whether you're planning to study abroad, thinking about working in another legal system, or just curious about how law works around the world, this podcast is for you.
Awesome. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Studying Law Around the World. Today, I'll be interviewing Brett Colvin, who is the CEO and founder of Goodlawyer, an incredible company that is very much changing the landscape of what a fractional in-house counsel looks like in Canada. A very innovative endeavor. And I wanted to ask you to start up our podcast today, Brett. If you could introduce yourself to our listeners and share a little bit about your background.
For sure, man. Well, I think you did a pretty good job. Just to fill in a few of the gaps. So, my name is Brett Colvin, and I'm the co-founders and the CEO of Goodlawyer. Goodlawyer is really a platform, a talent house to attract in-house lawyers who are looking for more flexibility or a little more entrepreneurial lean in the practices that they're building. And Goodlawyer has evolved a lot over the years. I started my career BLG, spent 4.5 years there. For a period, thought I would be there for a long time, but ultimately, my entrepreneurial spirit and I was always kind of was Mr. Ideas guy, which was not a compliment. Ultimately, bumped into too many walls, and I just was a little bit exasperated and finally sort of convinced that if I wanted to affect change in this industry that I'd been a part of and was going to spend my career in, I wasn't going to be able to do it from the inside. So that's really what sparked sort of the desire to build Goodlawyer. I've always been a little entrepreneur when I was a little kid, and Goodlawyer, for me, has been a platform to express many of the ideas and the frustrations of the practicing lawyer. And probably we've brought a tremendous number of talented people onto our team that have really contributed to shaping and getting Goodlawyer to where it is today. So yeah, that's me.
That's awesome. I read a little bit about the story of Goodlawyer, and if I'm recalling it correctly, that comes really from a conversation you had in the beginning of your law school experience. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that, and then also even looking back, how did that conversation really shaped this vision for your career? Because you finished up law school and then worked at a law firm for a while, so that was kind of in the back burner for a long time, or how did that go?
Yeah, so I mean, I think you're talking about the story about Mo, and Mo was an immigrant entrepreneur, coffee shop near the law school, and I went up to U of A for business and law, and so I got to know Mo a little bit during business school. He was probably my go-to coffee shop, and then when I got back for law, bumped into him again. He remembered me, and we were just having this like jovial conversation. And then he asked me, what was I doing back in the building? I said, "Oh, I'm in law school now." And that was when Mo went from really friendly to a bit more serious. And I just remember him looking at me and like pointing at me and saying, "Be a good lawyer. Be a good lawyer." He really held on that "be a good lawyer" piece. And I don't know, it hit me like a ton of bricks. And there was something about that phrasing, that good lawyer. And he wasn't just talking about being a smart, competent practitioner. There was something deeper sort of embedded in that. And really, I think from my experience, in law school, in the firm, and then these last 5-6 years building Goodlawyer, 99% of the lawyers I meet are really good people. They want to make a positive difference in the world. They want to support their families. They want to support their colleagues. But the system that we're trained to come up in, and one of the most famous lawyer lines is, whenever I ask, why do we do it this way? It was always sort of the response I always got was because it's always been done this way, and that never really sat so well. So I think the way that I saw where my career could have gone if I stayed in the big firm I just couldn't look myself in the face and like sort of see that trajectory, see the partners who I respected, but didn't want that same career path or that same life that I saw them living. And I mean, frankly, I kind of always been a bit of a crazy entrepreneur. And so for me, just being sort of stifled in terms of my creativity, trying new things or challenging the status quo was not the environment to do it in. You know, again, that sort of kicked off the Goodlawyer journey. But what Goodlawyer has become today, if I'm being completely honest, you know, back in first year law when I was talking to Mo, I could not have pictured. I just knew that I was going to start a business one day. Goodlawyer felt special when Mo said it. You know, it wasn't until years later after the firm and even into the Goodlawyer journey where, you know, we really narrowed in and realized that there was this big gap for businesses, you know, who have complex legal needs. You know, the two traditional paths for those corporate lawyers were a big law firm generally, and then the in-house route. And it just was so clear that there was something missing in the middle. And that's what we've been focused on trying to build. And we keep learning and keep iterating every day. But reception has been good, and I'm excited for what the future holds.
That's amazing. That's amazing. It's been fun to watch it from like far away in a way. Something that I've noticed and that I'm trying to kind of understand more and more as I speak to other lawyers. I feel like one of the things that I'm noticing is that many times the motto is really like accommodating for people who are very close to retiring, but then is very hard for those kind of coming into the pipeline, and then maybe a lot of these models are still kind of following that, catering to that public. But specifically about your business model, I'm trying to understand here, you know, what problem were you and are you solving for both the lawyers and the clients in this style of doing business? And, you know, I think me and some of my listeners might not have, you know, the picture of what the industry looks like right now. So if you don't mind kind of sharing with us quickly, what does the like traditional secondment or staffing model looks like, and then versus what Good Lawyers is doing?
Mhm. Yeah, no, happy to kind of fill in some of those blanks, my friend. So maybe for starters, Goodlawyer's focused on business law. You know, we're not doing family criminal. Like we have a lane, and unfortunately, that lane aligns with, you know, one of the things I'm passionate about, which is business. And so we stay very strictly in that business lane. And then when it comes to like the companies that we're supporting, it's pretty simple. You know, for these larger mid-market or enterprise organizations, they have a tremendous amount of legal needs. And, you know, if you rewind the clock far enough, all of those legal needs were serviced by external traditional law firms. At some point, you know, don't pin me to a date, but 20, 30 years ago, there was this realization that, you know, sending all the work outside of the business was A, expensive, and B, and perhaps B is, you know, at least as important, disconnected. There was always somebody in the business who was forced to quarterback those legal needs. And as organizations got more complex, you know, market cap companies got bigger and bigger, those legal needs got more complex. That continued to compound. And eventually they started building that legal muscle in-house. They knew that there would still be work that they needed to send externally, but more and more. And if you look at this, the sort of growth of in-house legal teams over the last 20 years, like it's incredible. Like in-house legal teams have gotten bigger and bigger every year as the organization, the company brings more and more of that legal muscle inside the business, as opposed to sending it out to external law firms. And that's, you know, a trend that is crystal clear. And from my perspective as an entrepreneur, it makes a ton of sense, because you want to solve legal problems, legal issues, take advantage of legal opportunities as close to the metal of the business as possible. And so it makes a lot of sense that these in-house legal teams, more connected, more cost effective, continue to grow. And where Goodlawyer comes in, and again, I'm focusing on the business, and I'll come back to the lawyers. Where Goodlawyer comes in for a business is splitting the middle between the pros and cons of hiring another full-time employee, another in-house lawyer onto your team, or perhaps your first in-house lawyer onto your team, and sending work externally to law firms. And so, you know, where you need an FTE as opposed to where you would like to send work out to a law firm, like that's a big gap. And Goodlawyer is, we're just obsessed with trying to fill that in between space as well as we can. And that's where this whole concept of fractional in-house counsel or fractional GC for those mid caps really came to bear and has been the launch pad for the business we're building now. On the talent side, and maybe just to wrap up there, it's way more Goodlawyer is way more cost effective than sending work externally, dramatically. And it's faster and simpler for a GC inside, a Fortune 500 to augment their existing in-house legal team with some specialization for maybe internal portfolio. That could be, fintech regulation, that could be supporting the partnerships revenue team. So there's a million ways that you can find the right talent, plug them in a cost-effective way without the burden of having to hire another full-time, part-time resource into the business. The side that actually I think is the most interesting, though, is the talent side, the lawyer side of the equation within Goodlawyer. And there's been a huge move to fractional across many service industries, professional services. We've been seeing the fractional CFO guys for a long time. And, you can pretty much hire any fractional C-suite you want. And that's all well and good. But I actually think that the fractional model works better for law than any other model. And the reason being is law is so technical, and the alternatives so often are to outsource that legal issue, that legal need to an external firm who's, totally disconnected from being close to that metal in the business, that it lends itself quite nicely to a specialist coming in and supporting in a way that the current existing sort of internal structure of that organization, whether it's a big in-house legal team, whether it's the CFO playing lawyer, in a way that is dramatically more streamlined than sending work to the firm. And, as I noted, sort of less burdensome than trying to figure out and hire for that expertise full-time in the business. And this trend that we've been seeing in fractional finally started to catch on with lawyers, I don't know, in the last 2-3 years. Certainly in Canada, it's been very recent. And I think Goodlawyer played a fairly significant role in helping promote the whole idea. I didn't make up fractional GC, but I do think we distributed that idea across Canada in a way that we hadn't seen previously. And the reason, and that's the other thing that I notice a lot, is sometimes there's, and it's less and less every day, but there's this perception that lawyers working in this fractional or flexible legal space doing it because they couldn't do anything else. They couldn't get in the big firm. They couldn't rise up the ranks in an in-house legal team. And I can assure you that is absolutely not the case. We are constantly having, the businesses that we work with trying to convert the fractional lawyers full time. And if that's what the lawyer wants and that's what the business wants, that's what we want. We're here to facilitate that relationship. But these lawyers that are truly thriving in this fractional world, it is the most desirable way for them to practice. They don't want to do anything else, because what it does is it puts them in control. And, now they get to practice in a way that fits into their life. It gives them tremendous flexibility. We've got the former GC of Canada working 2 fractionals half the time. She could go get GC jobs all over the place. She chooses not to because she's at a stage in her career where, she wants to work half-time. She still wants to work on sophisticated work and with really impressive, businesses, organizations, but she doesn't want to do it full-time. She's already gone through that a couple times in her career, and she's over that. It was a great experience, but she doesn't want to do that right now. She wants to, sail her boat and enjoy life a little bit more. On the flip end, we have lawyers that are, and this is probably the most common segment in the Goodlawyer network, that kind of 8 to 15 year call, spent, their first 3-4 years like I did in big law, and then probably 2/3 of that time working in-house in an industry they're passionate about. And for these folks, again, flexibility can be really critical. Raising a family, taking care of elderly parents, whatever, wanting to travel the world. There's a lot of reasons why folks in the prime time of their career want that flexibility. But then we also have other folks that love in-house work, don't want to be chasing a billable target all year, don't want the burden of having to build a book and become partner and do that whole thing, but they do want to max their income, and they, are itching to fill their plate up sort of maximum, because that's the other thing it takes a bit more time to stack fractionals if you're, a good lawyer in the network. But once you do, you're making a higher unit rate than you would if you had a full-time job. So, we've got good lawyers working, like the GC I mentioned, working a couple days a week, making north of 200. And then we've got other lawyers, prime time of their career. They're here to build as much as they can, maybe close to $500,000. And so there is this spectrum of opportunities for lawyers, but it really does come down to sort of the starting point, which is I either want flexibility or I want something a little more entrepreneurial than I'm getting in any of these full-time roles. That's a long-winded answer, but there you go.
Oh, that's amazing. I really appreciate you going into the details, and it makes so much sense of why both a business and a lawyer could really want to work in this model. And going a little drilling on the talent side of it, since you mentioned it so much. I'm not sure if this is your motto or a good lawyer's motto, but something along the lines of win the talent, win the game. So I'd love to hear a little more about, how do you find, vet, and retain that top legal talent? And especially at the same time, what makes Good Lawyer be the choice for those lawyers today? You just mentioned a lot about, the flexibility, the possibility of flexibility both in the income and in the working hours. But I'd love to hear a little more on that.
So, I think one of the things that, probably the reason I'm on the podcast today that we've done well is we've built a brand, and, we've built this growing community, especially in Canada, of lawyers who, maybe aren't the crazy entrepreneur like I am that, wanted to live in grandma's basement for a couple of years to get Good Lawyer off the ground. But they do feel that something is not quite working for them in the traditional models, whether that's, often, that's from their time working in big law, but could also be from, going as far as they want to go in a full-time role in-house. And because we've built this brand, and I think, we keep on refining and hopefully doing a better job at, telling our story and mission and what we're all about, to the world, especially if that segment of the world's on LinkedIn, where we do most of our talking or storytelling. But because we've built that brand, there's been no period in the history of Good Lawyer where we haven't been able to find talent. We have been very fortunately and somewhat haphazardly become a magnet for folks that resonate with, I think, just the general idea that there should be something else, that the traditional paths are great for a lot of lawyers, but not all lawyers. And there's too many that feel stuck in one of those traditional paths, and, way too many who just opt out of the profession entirely. And so I think because we've, created space for this highly attractive alternative, lawyers, are applying to be in the Good Lawyer network every day. Like there's almost never a day that goes by where we don't have a lawyer apply to be in the network. And what that has driven internally at Good Lawyer, because a quarter of my in-house team is product and dev. And so that inbound interest, and then just that sheer sort of growing number of lawyers that we've vetted to be in the community and therefore in our database and available for opportunities, has pushed us to build tools. And all the advancements in AI recently have made those tools a hell of a lot more powerful to help us find that needle in the haystack that is perfect for the mandate that just came in, the opportunity that just came in, and connect those dots with a tiny team relative to the number of professionals that we're supporting. And I think another good sort of number to throw out there is when I think back to my big firm days, there was probably 1.5, maybe even 2 sort of I don't like this term, but the sort of support staff, whether that's assistants, paralegals, marketing folk, other bodies inside the firm supporting the revenue generators, which are all lawyers. There's no revenue generators inside of a firm that aren't billing hours. And, that ratio of let's just call it 1.5 to every lawyer. In our model, we've got over 400 lawyers now and 16 full-time people on the team. And we're just about to hire, 4 more bodies onto the team, maybe a 5th in the next couple of weeks here, which, when you're a 16-person full-time team is a lot of growth, but our ability to service over 400 lawyers with such a skeleton crew is a function of the tools that we've built, the processes, the business model generally. But I kind of lost my train of thought there, but hopefully that answers your question.
No, absolutely it does. It absolutely does. And I guess I didn't discuss this extensively with you, but who I'm speaking to here in the podcast, most of my listeners nowadays are early career professionals, people who are looking into what a career could look like and all of that. And knowing that, you navigated a big law, you launched Goodlawyer, very like business oriented and all of that. I'd love to hear, if you look back, is there some kind of piece of advice you wish you'd have been given, right at the start of your career, or after leaving all of these, is there something that you would tell to younger lawyers now that are, oftentimes looking around and seeing maybe not as many opportunities, or maybe seeing a system that by some can be described as broken, or one that will lead to, not as great of outcomes?
Yeah, for sure. So for all those, soon to be or brand new lawyers listening, like Elon, I'm not going to give you a date, but I can guarantee that there will be, a Goodlawyer apprentice, a Goodlawyer articling program at some point in the future, because it's so obvious. And, where law started, it in a way where, me and the team are trying to take it back to. And I'm just going to give you like a unrequested quick history lesson. But when, lawyers started working with businesses, 100 years ago, a lawyer and, the CEO or whoever was running the business would have a conversation at the beginning of the year. They would agree on an amount, and they would get paid in 12 monthly installments, just like a fractional lawyer does today. And, you get this much of my time. That lawyer would have a few businesses that he was supporting or she was supporting. It was off to the races. There was no tracking of time whatsoever. It was really more a trusted agreement. And over time, it was actually clients that drove to the creation of tracking time. Maybe lawyers took it to the point ones that we know and don't love today. But to me, this is really kind of like a full circle on where law started, which is, you get to know a few clients intimately. You become an extension of their business, and you're able to, stay sane, not track a billable rate, and also, provide your expertise in a way that, really moves the needles for the organizations that you're supporting. And I tell this story because there's a lot of doom and gloom, especially with all of the Richard Susskind, The End of Lawyers. That was a book that I read back in law school. I don't buy it. Betting my business on the world needing lawyers being way too far away for me to care. If we're in a world where you don't need smart, compassionate, purposeful lawyers, then we're living in a crazy world, and we're all on, universal basic income or something. But I think from my perspective, there has never been a better time to practice law and become a lawyer. And maybe the final kind of little anecdote I'll share on this point is, it was my first day of law school. It was even before I met Mo and came up with the name Goodlawyer. It was my first day. It was foundations class, and I'll never forget this Professor DeCoste, rest in peace. He's gone now, but he said, we're in the middle of the class. We're all excited. It's first day of law school. And he just like slammed his book down. And I think it might've been the first thing he said: the 3 Ds of being a lawyer: duty, deadlines, and drudgery. Duty, I was okay with. I don't mind taking on responsibility. Building a business like Goodlawyer requires a lot of duty. Deadlines, like any good lawyer, I'm highly motivated by deadlines and can, work to a deadline. So like that one was okay too. But the drudgery, that one gave me pause. I don't think that there are a lot of folks, because, to get into law school, to go the whole 9 yards, you got to be a smart, driven individual. And I just don't believe, and certainly from my experience, haven't seen a lot of those folks that want to be a good lawyer, want to be a lawyer that, has an impact. that they were expecting a ton of drudgery and doc review and, you know, just like all of the things that I did as a especially early associate that just didn't feel like they were adding value. I knew I was clocking time. I knew that time was getting billed out to, massive enterprises that, you know, aren't blinking over, a $100,000 bill. But I knew that I would never pay, I think when I left, I was a fourth year associate, 500 something an hour, like to watch the photocopier go through, a million images on a doc review, or, go through the same agreement 400 times for a huge transaction, changing names that I knew could be automated. And I think this wave of AI is really pushing the envelope on the billable hour model, certainly client expectations, and where I think it all leads, because there's also so much unmet legal need inside. I'm not even talking the access to justice crisis that, I think most people picture when they hear that, which is, folks that can't access legal at all for like basic things like getting divorced or, getting in trouble or whatever it is. There's so much unmet legal need, which equates to legal risk or missed opportunities inside of businesses. And, if we can fast forward, I mean, it's already happening. The transition is moving quite quickly, but if we fast forward 5-10 years and, articling students like yourself don't ever have to do a doc review again. Junior associates don't have to, find the template from the right partner and then like massage it and pray that they can just, use tools to strip away the drudgery and get to focus their energies on, the funnest and most, frankly, like human parts of being a lawyer. I think that's a profession that retains way more people. And, if you think about doctors, you don't have a massive, I mean, some doctors leave the profession, certainly, but you don't have a massive exodus of doctors from practicing the profession that they trained in. In law, you do. It's insane how many lawyers opt out of being lawyers after 5 years, 10 years in the profession, because it's just not the life they want to live. And I attribute a lot of that to the business models and the obsession around targets and billables. But I also attribute that tremendously to the drudgery that doesn't make the practitioner, the professional, feel important, feel valued, feel like they're driving, something positive in a real way that isn't just, being attention to detail and meticulous. So if I was coming up and I was coming in law school, despite all of the talk and all the hoo-ha about, what the future of the profession looks like, I would be feeling very bullish and excited. And I would be, really starting to play with the tools for sure, but also starting to think about what are like the unique human things that lawyers do that I need to get better at. And, I think you're a great example, my friend. Starting a podcast, having these conversations is going to serve you so well as you continue to build your career. And yeah, if I had to sort of summarize it on one point, I'd say the future of law is bright. And check us out, goodlawyer.ca, my friend.
Really appreciate you making the time to be in the podcast today, Brett. Thank you so much for all of you listening to today's episode as well. And we'll see you on the next one.
Rock and roll, my friend. Cheers.